Deep inside the Guatemalan jungle, there is a city that should not feel this large, this old, or this hidden. The trees have swallowed its edges. The rain has softened its stones. And for centuries, the forest kept one of the greatest Maya centers in the world almost completely out of sight. This is El Mirador. Not a village, not a minor ruin, a true ancient city, built long before the classic temples of Tikal became famous and hidden so deeply in the Peten that even today it still feels like the jungle is guarding a secret. At its peak, Mirador was one of the great urban worlds of the ancient Maya, a place of enormous pyramids, raised causeways, reservoirs, and political power. And at the center of that city stood La Danta, a monument so massive that it does not feel like architecture at first. It feels like a mountain that human hands decided to build. This is empires lost in time, and today we are entering the forgotten Maya city of Mirador. If you enjoy cinematic journeys through ancient civilizations, buried cities, and lost worlds reclaimed by nature, subscribe to the channel. Because this story is not just about ruins. It is about a civilization that built greatness in the middle of the forest, then slowly surrendered it to time. To understand Mirador, you first have to understand the landscape. The Maya lowlands of northern Guatemala were never easy to master. Dense forest, seasonal rains, difficult ground, hidden wetlands, and long distances all made life here demanding. And yet, in this difficult world, people built one of the most ambitious city systems in the ancient Americas. That is what makes Mirador so powerful. It was not built in a comfortable place. It was built in a place that fought back. The city belonged to the broader Mirador Basin, a landscape filled with monumental centers and connected settlements. Roads stretched through the forest. Large civic spaces were raised above the ground. Water had to be controlled, stored, and managed. Every part of the city tells the same story. This was a society that did not just survive in the jungle. It organized the jungle around itself. And long before the classic Maya kings of Tikal and Calakmul became famous, Mirador was already rising into power during the pre-classic period. That matters because it changes the whole timeline most people imagine. The Maya were building cities of astonishing scale far earlier than many realize, and Mirador was one of the clearest proofs of that. Look at La Danta, and you begin to understand the scale. This pyramid is not famous because it is delicate or elegant. It is famous because it is overwhelming. It rises in layers, broad and heavy, almost like a natural hill that was carved and controlled by human ambition. From a distance, it can disappear into the forest canopy. Up close, it makes you feel small. That is exactly what Maya monumental architecture was meant to do. These pyramids were not just places to climb. They were sacred mountains. They were symbols of order. They were the point where rulers, gods, ancestors, and the human world met. A city like Mirador was not only a place to live, it was a place to prove that power had cosmic meaning. And Mirador proved that early. The city was tied to a network of causeways, often called sacbe, that linked places across the landscape. These raised roads were not just practical, they were political. They connected settlements, ritual spaces, and centers of authority. In the Maya world, roads were never only roads. They were statements that a city could reach farther than its walls. That kind of project does not happen by accident. It requires labor, planning, surplus, and leadership strong enough to organize people at a massive scale. Mirador was part of a civilization that understood how to turn collective effort into sacred urban form. But here is the part that makes the city even more haunting. Mirador's greatness came long before the famous Maya collapse stories people usually hear. This was an earlier world, a foundational one. And because of that, when Mirador declined, it did not decline as a famous empire falling from its peak. It faded out of the story before most people even learned its name. And that is how the jungle won. If this story is pulling you in, leave a like and subscribe to Empires Lost in Time. These are the places that remind us that history is not only what survives in books. Sometimes history survives as a shape under the trees. For a long time, Mirador remained little known outside archaeology. Then researchers began to realize just how enormous the site really was. It was not just one pyramid, one plaza, or one temple. It was an entire urban landscape, a city system, a world built from stone, labor, ritual, and political control. And that is what makes it so fascinating. Mirador feels like an ancient prototype. It shows the Maya already experimenting with scale, sacred space, and urban order long before later centers became famous. In that sense, Mirador is not only a lost city, it is one of the places where Maya civilization learned how to become the Maya civilization most people know. The city also tells us something about memory. Some ruins become famous because they were never fully forgotten. Others disappear so completely that rediscovery feels like time has opened a sealed chamber. Mirador belongs to the second kind. When modern archaeologists entered the region, what they found was not a small ceremonial outpost. It was a huge and complex ancient city hidden under the rainforest. Some parts are still difficult to reach. Some areas remain hard to study. And that means Mirador still holds secrets, even now. That is part of its power. It does not give up its story all at once. What we do know is already extraordinary. Mirador was part of a major pre-classic world that included large settlements, monumental construction, and political networks spread through the basin. It was a place where kings or elites, ritual specialists, workers, and families all participated in a system that made the city possible. This was not a random collection of ruins. It was an ancient urban order. And like every great urban order, it depended on stability. Water had to be managed. Land had to be productive. Labor had to be organized. Alliances had to hold. Religious authority had to remain believable. Roads had to be maintained. In a place like this, collapse does not arrive all at once. It arrives when enough parts of the system begin to strain together. That is the great tragedy of Mirador. The exact causes of its decline are still debated, and they should be. Ancient collapse is rarely one clean explanation. Environmental stress, political fragmentation, changing regional patterns, and the cost of sustaining such a large system all likely played a role. But whatever the exact combination, the outcome was the same. The city stopped being maintained at the level it once had been. Great projects ceased. Routes changed. Power moved elsewhere. And when the human system loosened, the forest did what forests always do. It returned. The jungle did not defeat Mirador in a single battle. It simply waited. And that waiting is what makes the ruins feel so alive today. Every staircase partly hidden by roots, every mound softened by vegetation, every platform disappearing under green tells you that this place is not dead. It is being slowly translated back into nature. But that does not make it any less important. If anything, it makes it more important. Because Mirador reminds us that the ancient Maya were not only builders of famous cities in the classic period, they were already creating enormous, organized, and deeply symbolic urban worlds centuries earlier. This city proves that the ancient Americas were full of civilizations capable of astonishing scale, even in places that modern eyes once underestimated. Mirador belongs to that truth. So when you imagine it at its height, do not imagine silence. Imagine plazas full of movement. Imagine laborers hauling stone. Imagine priests preparing ceremonies. Imagine rulers using architecture to project sacred authority. Imagine roads cutting through the forest. Imagine the city rising above the canopy, visible from a distance like a sign that human order had claimed the jungle. Then imagine that order fading. The roads are no longer cleared. The great buildings are no longer expanded. The plazas become quiet. The people move on. The rituals change. The city remains for a while, but its center of gravity is gone. And slowly, the forest begins its final work. That is the story of Mirador: rise, greatness, retreat, and reclamation. Today, what survives is not only stone. It is the feeling that there was once a civilization here powerful enough to reshape the forest and fragile enough to be swallowed by it. That contradiction is what makes Mirador unforgettable. It is a lost city, yes. But more than that, it is a reminder that some of the greatest worlds in history were never meant to be easy to find. They had to be uncovered, piece by piece, under roots, rain, and time. And when you finally stand before the ruins, whether in person or in your mind, the message is the same. The jungle did not erase Mirador. It preserved the fact that Mirador was here at all.